Hello and welcome to Hypnotic Health Center Masterclass today on positive psychology. I thought I should start by discussing a little bit of history relative to positive psychology. Some people will argue that many of the critical questions of positive psychology go back in history. We can notice tonalities of this tendency of positive psychology in the past, in the ancient philosophers, for example, like Plato, because he was already concerned with questions related to virtues, to what is the meaning of life, etc. But the certain thing is that we don't need to go too far. If you consider the not so distant past, we can see that humanistic psychology is the most direct link with positive psychology. And just like positive psychology, humanistic psychology had an entire holistic approach to the human function. Humanistic psychology in general deal with many of the topics that we also see nowadays in positive psychology. Questions, for example, like meaning of values, freedom, personal responsibility, human potential, etc. All those topics were also addressed by the field of humanistic psychology. For example, some key figures of the humanistic psychology like Abraham Maslow or Carl Rogers, Rollo May, acted in that time as like a resistant group back in the days in reaction to behaviorism and psychoanalysis. The view of humanistic psychology into these two approaches were quite negative. For them, behaviorists basically thought of human beings as a black box, a symbol in where a machine responds. There was not much room for cognition. And in the other hand, psychoanalysis was concerned with topics like instinct, neurosis, psychosis. Therefore, as you can see, there was quite a lot of focus on the negative aspect by the behaviorist and the psychoanalyst, negative aspect of the human functioning. So this positive approach starts sounding fantastic, but there was a big problem in humanistic psychology: the lack of rigorous method, the rigorous scientific method. So in a few words, it had a lot of beautiful ideas, but it wasn't testing those ideas with the standards of science. For that reason, it became quite successful in a parallel health area, but not much at the universities. Nowadays, many scholars, when they look back at the history, they recognize that humanistic psychology was more like a philosophy than a psychology. Here, we have a great connection of ideas in this topic, because in some way you could say that positive psychology take the same approach to human function as the humanistic psychology. But the difference is that positive psychology have a scientific background, have a scientific methodology that support all the big ideas that we saw in humanistic psychology. Consequently, we can say that positive psychology aims to test predictions that were made by humanistic psychology. And if you see, positive psychology is using the standard of today's science. What is fascinating and also essential for this new model is the difference between that negative approach to healing. In one of the most influential papers at the beginning of positive psychology, or is marked as by many as the beginning of positive psychology movement, we can find the following quote: psychology has, since the World War II, become a science largely about healing. It concentrates on repairing damage within a disease model of human functioning. This quote is from Seligman and Zimeli in 2000. This quote stress mainly, in simple words, that we have been devoting a lot of attention to this question. What is wrong with people? What is wrong with people? Or which factors impair human functioning, if we use a more scientific words. And I think it is fair to say that this is an important question, but this is not the only question that we should have been asking especially when you see clients. It is clear that because we have addressed this question, we have developed handy tools to help people, and we have designed interventions that can help people to recover from certain illnesses. Consequently, it's fair to say that this is an important question to others. I'm clear of that. But if we consider the topics that have been addressed in psychology science, especially in clinical psychology, and you compare just to show a bit about them, I also think it is the reason why Seligman and his colleague started this movement of positive psychology. You can see here in the graphic that these are the numbers and concerns the study address, and this topic like anger, anxiety, and depression, you can see that have more research than those that are focused on positive things, especially when you compare them to studies on topics like joy, happiness, and satisfaction. In fact, if you consider the ratio between them is also about like 21-1. And when you see this, if you see this in this way, it's kind of like understandable why many people started to recognize the need to balance this need to create a more attention into the positive part of this coin, to say it in some way. So let's use this figure to illustrate some points, what positive psychology actually does. Okay, if we establish the factors -5, and this factor represent a state in which people are suffering, where there is a low state of well-being, and we mark 0 as a representation of a state in which people are free from suffering, and +5 as a representation of an state in which people are flourishing with a happy life or thriving with a sense of meaning and direction. I think this is where we have focused the most on helping people to go from the state -5 to 0, which is quite a deficit focus area for many reasons, but mainly because there are many misconceptions around addressing weakness. There is a lot of misconception in this focus of addressing the weakness model. Today, I will only address 3 of these misconceptions. There are many more, of course, but I think these 3 are the most important for this masterclass today. Okay. First, the first misconception is that fixing what is wrong will automatically lead to well-being. The idea that when we help people to move from -5 to 0, the action, just that action, is good enough to make people happy and flourish automatically. And this is not true. Positive conditions and negative conditions are not in the same continuum. But many people still believe that the absence of negative emotions will automatically produce positive feelings. People think getting rid of anger will automatically create joy, but it's not like that. Many studies show that positive and negative emotions can exist in the same line. They can coexist in also, but in a different continuum, and there is a separate front of each other rather than on the same line. Therefore, getting rid of anger, fear, or depression will not automatically cause peace, love, and joy, for example. It's not that simple in life. It's not merely in psychology. The absence of mental illnesses, for example, in psychology, do not imply the presence of mental health, and vice versa. There are quite a few studies that show that even people who are suffering in a way from mental illness are quite happy with their life. But on the other hand, also people who are not having certain illnesses are still lacking a sense of a meaning, direction, and do not report to be very happy in life. What is essential here is always to remember that positive and negative are complex things. They are not simple. So we can see here in the figure, -5 to +5, and we can understand that or represent the many studies that have been conducted also emphasize that moving to a +5 point, to use this figure again, do not involve only getting rid of the -5, involve something more. Therefore, when we take these principles, mean that the 0 point, the point which people are not complaining anymore, and the majority of the people feel that they're ready after therapy if they're in 0, they don't have any problems, but it's not the same as +5. It's not a happiness situation. It is common to receive people at the office that say to me things like, I know I'm not officially suffering from a problem anymore, but I'm not feeling happy. I'm not feeling that my life is going anywhere. For me, this is a very clear illustration of a person who feels that without that minus five, if it's not in the minus five anymore, but it's also not in the plus part. Those are two very different things. Okay, that's the first misconception. The second misconception, and a very pervasive one, is that the fact of copying is not reflecting in the reduction of negative states. This, let me explain. I know that this phrase can be confused. The significant part of this common misconception, because it's very common, they're still present in the literature, and it's crazy how many practices just focus only in trying to reduce the negative states. For example, I have done some studies also in the field of eating behavior. Many of the intervention and studies try to reduce the food cravings. The general thinking process follows in this way. If we help people to get rid of food cravings, we can solve the problem. We can solve the problem because, assuming this, if the food craving go away, people will automatically eat less. But it's not the food craving that predict that eat less behavior. It's the ability of cope with food cravings that predict the healthy eating. Another example can be the absence of stress. That is, it's related to successful weight maintenance. If you reduce stress, you can maintain your weight. So you can effectively deal with the stress. Therefore, you can focus, or that will be a way of coping on experience. And in some way, I'm talking about a topic that is related to the third wave of psychology and therapy. This third wave talk about that when we change the relationship that we have with that we feel, then we can effectively deal with that state. And it's here where hypnosis or mindfulness can help people to support well-being, because using hypnosis or meditation to accept that emotion, that situation related to the emotion, helps the person to deal with that rational perspective, to help people to understand they are allowed to feel sad, that it's okay to feel sad. So in that way, the sadness do not need to go away. And if it's okay to feel sad, what happened maybe is that I can stay depressed for a little time, and that will fade away, and that is okay. But if you take the traditional approach, the one that you should get rid of that negative thinking process, then you get into a fight mode with that emotion. Therefore, you start fighting and you say, oh my God, I should not feel this way, this emotion should go away. And this is why in general it's so important to focus on the client, not on how to get rid of food cravings or negative feelings, but to change the way they relate with those states, and tell them that they need to learn, show them and teach them that it is okay to feel sad, and that's part of human condition, that is part of life, and that everybody feels sad, but you need to accept it, and you need to cope with that situation. That is the second misconception. The third one is the prevention focus approach. In a traditional way of prevention, we traditional work around the problem. We want to prevent that specific problem from occurring. People focus on the, well, let's call it back to the future solution. Let's go back and prevent that the situation happen. People say, why we treat people with problem X? Let's just prevent it. Let's focus on how we can avoid that X problem from occurring in the first place. And this is wrong. We cannot focus on the prevention of the problem with a client in the office. That doesn't make sense. The question is, or should be, and in some ways this is the heart of positive psychology. We need to ask ourselves, why do some people flourish despite difficult circumstances? Why some persons can do that? A concrete example, if, for example, person A and person B, experience a very same event. They say they lose their job. A person A develop depression, because that then generate anxiety and stress and sadness, and he end up with severe depression. But person B, for some reason, go on with their life and see this situation as a new opportunity and just continue with life in a complex, different way. There is a question. The question there is, or the question that we should ask there as a professional is, what is going on here? What does the person B is doing differently compared to the person A? What is going on here? What kind of strengths or what kind of mental process are going on into these two different persons? In this way, we arrive at the heart of positive psychology. And when you try to answer these questions, the answers that come up are often related to the strength that people have, the interpretation of these events, the ability to put these things into perspective, in different perspective. These three are some of the misconceptions that I want to work today. But if you are going to check more of this misconception, you can check the course handbook. If you take the full course on positive psychology and emotional intelligence, you can check that on the workbook. And in these three misconceptions, I believe they are good enough to open the door to focus on the strengths that derive or the positive psychology focus on. Martin Seligman, who is considered to be the founding father of positive psychology, refers to it as the scientific study of optimal human functioning that aims to discover and promote the factors that allow individuals and communities to thrive. And he acknowledged in this definition again that what we are doing here is digging for gold. We are digging for things that help people to flourish and become resilient. Accordingly to these questions, to the question that positive psychology attempt to address is mainly what is right about people. What are your strengths, or using a different term, a more scientific term, which factors promote human flourishing? Although the question that we addressed previously, the negative question about which factors impair human functioning, we can see that it's a totally different approach. And this one, the last one, seemed to be dissimilar to the one that positive psychology has. They are tremendously different. In fact, if we focus on correcting weakness all the time, that is very different from that of focusing on promoting the person's strengths. So if we use the figure that we're basing this training on, we can see that the focus here is on moving from 0 to +5, the focus of positive psychology, or if you want from -0 to +5. In any case, positive psychology is aimed at the positive part. So to see what is needed for a person to be flourishing and happy and so on, rather than focus just on being okay, on just achieve the 0 point, we need to go to the positive part. Well, before we finish this class, I want to clarify some points that are very important when people is introduced to positive psychology. Some people believe that positive psychology is about getting rid of the negative psychology, for saying in some way. And first, it's important to clarify that there is not negative psychology, that doesn't exist. It is important to understand that weaknesses are also important to others. It's important also to others' strength, of course, but we cannot ignore the person's weaknesses. If we are not paying attention to the weakness part, we are unlikely to promote well-being. Just ignoring the problems that people have will not help them, therefore, to survive. Therefore, and so positive psychology can be considered as an addition to the field of psychology, not a replacement of clinical psychology. Traditional psychology has offered a lot of excellent tools, a lot of unique techniques and interventions, and positive psychology provides a value addition to psychology. It's not a replacement to psychology. And again, we should take into consideration the fact that negative psychology doesn't exist. When people hear the words positive psychology, some of them believe that negative psychology also exists, because this dichotomic comparison, the positive and the negative. So the psychology is evaluating positive and negative terms. So this can lead to false impression that there is good and bad research in psychology, or good and bad psychology, or you are bad as a person that go there, or using general words like a positive or negative is not good to refer to human functions. I don't believe that those dichotomic terms can build the things. And the truth is that I'm not a big fan of the word negative psychology. Neither I am a fan of the word positive psychology. Why? Because I as I explained it previously, I think maybe a better word will be well-being psychology or flourishing psychology. And an evaluative term like positive or negative can be confused for the people, especially the people that is starting the path on positive psychology. Another point that has to do with the comparison that we are making between topics that have been studied by positive psychology and traditional psychology. We are not just discussing depression, anxiety, and so on as traditional psychology. Is evident when you evaluate the psychological research of the past 4 years in a domain of positive psychology, and you compare it with clinical psychology in general, you will say that this different research has mainly adopted in the clinical psychology or psychopathology a negative side of human functions. But it's essential to have in mind that the field of psychology research goes far beyond the subdomains of psychopathology or clinical psychology. Example of other ideas include health psychology, social psychology, developmental psychology, organizational psychology, and there are many more, of course. In the case of when we simplify, or in the case of this course, we refer to psychology as equal of clinical psychology or psychopathology. And those two are the ones dedicated to dealing with problems. There are the two brands dedicated in their core topics. And it's important to take in consideration that between psychology and positive psychology, when we talk about just psychology, is clinical psychology or psychopathology. Also, it's important to remember that we're talking about positive psychology that born around the year 2000, but there are many studies on well-being that deal also with positive psychology, but they are before the year 2000. So we also respect that those studies are referred to positive psychology. We believe that the year 2000 is a year that everything exploded, but before that we also have studies that relate to positive psychology. And that is the master class for today. I hope you enjoy the class on positive psychology.